And you just feel in the pages that this is somebody who cares about the trans community, that this is about fighting back, and this is about advocacy and hope and love and euphoria. And you don't feel as though there's just darkness in the future when you're reading it.
Content warnings for this episode include anti-trans bigotry, book bans, and workplace discrimination.
Genderful would like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples and unceded lands that the producers, hosts, and guests live and have dwelt upon. Today we honor the
Coast Salish,
Mohawk, Algonquin, and Anishinabewaki,
Wôpanâak, Massa-adchu-es-et, and Pokanoket.
We honor the elders, the human, plant, and animal ancestors of these lands, and celebrate the living descendants of these peoples. May all beings tend these lands for the goodness of the next 7 generations and beyond.
Howdy folks, welcome to Genderful, a talk show interviewing gender diverse people about their special interests. Hi, I'm GenderMeowster, and my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, I'm Miranda, and my pronouns are she, her.
The focus of our show is to interview trans, non-binary, agender, two-spirit, and gender diverse people regarding their special interests, passion projects, and resources for the gender diverse community.
We want our audience to know that we hold multiple diverse identities and bring these lenses to the show with our passion for telling our stories.
I identify as non-binary, trans-masculine, polyamorous, ADHD, autistic, and disabled with chronic pain and mobility issues. I also am white and reside in the United States.
I identify as trans feminine, neurodivergent, queer, and a person of color residing in Canada. We invite you to remember that we are whole people with robust lives, friendships, challenges, and successes. We love and are loved, and we are delighted to share these stories with you.
As always, we kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of their identities. Your identities can change over time and are valid every step of the way. And if you think you're gender diverse, you are gender diverse. There's no social or medical prerequisite to be included in the community. Welcome to Genderful Podcast, a show interviewing gender diverse people about their special interests. This week, our guest Fin Leary, he, they pronouns, is chatting with us about trans representation in young adult fiction. Fin is a writer, program manager of the literary nonprofit We Need Diverse Books, a faculty member at Emerson College, and much, much more. He currently lives in Massachusetts with his wife and their cats. Welcome to Genderful, Fin.
Thank you.
It's really exciting to have you here.
I just want to make a quick correction that these cats are literary cats.
I want to know what a literary cat is.
They're named after book characters.
What are your cats' names? You tell us.
Blue Gansey and Keo.
So cute. I love that. That's wonderful. So Fin, would you mind doing like a visual description of yourself for listeners who can't see you, perhaps?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm a white, non-binary, transgender man. I have dark brown hair and blue eyes, and I am wearing a colorful rainbow plaid shirt.
I love that. It is very colorful and very plaid.
The description is not doing it justice. It's actually fabulous.
It might be the gayest shirt anyone is wearing today in the script.
Oh,
I'm wearing
100%.
my Move I'm They shirt, but it's not. It holds
100%.
0 candles to the fabulous outfit that Fin is wearing today.
I'm wearing a very light camo t-shirt dress, which I didn't realize it was. I didn't realize it was camo print when I bought it. So I'm just like, whatever.
I like when people wear camo print in a gay way, like the idea of wearing it in a gay way.
Yes, like just pink camo.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm blending in with the other gays.
Yes. I love it. Trash Can Wills is asking from the chat, what are each of your cats' favorite books? We need to know what books the cats like to read. Ooh, woo.
That's a good question. I've actually had friends ask me what my cats think while I'm reading a book with them on my lap, and they don't know how to read because they're cats, to my knowledge. I like to think that Blue and Gansey like the series that they're named after, but I don't know if realistically that is true.
Maybe they like to lay on the books.
They like whatever.
Knock them off of counters.
I don't want to read because I will put it down and pet them instead. So they like books that are like a DNF, a do not finish book.
Nice. Now I'm imagining you have like just boards, Kanban boards and boards of different books in different categories of like, don't finish this one. It's no good. So Finn, there's a couple questions that we love to ask all of our guests so that our gender diverse folks listening get to hear sort of the stories and trajectories of the people that are on the show. So I'm wondering what might be the things that you can trace back to your youth that indicated you might be gender diverse one day?
What could I not trace back? I think for me, the story that I like to tell when I'm thinking about my own personal knowledge that I would figure out that I'm trans. I had a transgender homeroom teacher when I was a fifth grade student in Malden, Massachusetts, and she was absolutely lovely and just the best teacher that I actually ever had. And I remember my experience of witnessing the transphobia that she was experiencing as a teacher as if it were personal to me. Now, at that time, I did not know that I was trans. This was my first real introduction to the possibility, the word, what that word meant for somebody. And I remember feeling everything that happened to her that was negative as if it were happening to me and thinking, oh, this is my community, that these are my people. We may not be the exact same experience because this is, an older woman in her 40s or 50s, and I think she was married, I was a child. So we had a lot of differences. Our experiences of gender were probably quite different, but I knew just from that alone that I was going to be a part of that community because I felt that very deeply. And it also happened to be the year that they sex segregated my class for sexual education, which was, common practice in the 2000s in schools. And I remember thinking, they're putting me in the wrong place. Like, they're putting me in the wrong place for this. I'm not going to get the information that I need about what's going to happen to me during puberty. And I don't think that most of my peers felt that way. I felt very differently about reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret than a lot of my cis friends who were girls. They were reading it and thinking, when am I going to get my period? When am I going to get boobs? When am I going to go through this? And I was like, never.
Yeah, no, it's when you said an older woman in her 40s, I'm like, oof, I'm an older woman in her 40s. Oh.
I was 10 at the time,
Yes,
so
yes. No, it's just I understand the context, but it's like, oof, I'm an older woman. Great.
I am now old, if it makes you feel better. I teach college, and at one point, my undergrad students said, "Oh, well, people who are around 30 are like a real adult, like they're grown up, they know what they're doing." And I was 29
No.
at the time of hearing this.
Yeah. Oh boy. If you're listening to this and you are a younger person and you think that we adults, we older people have things figured out, we don't. um, but yeah, no,
Figured out what's that?
I had a very similar experience because I went back to school as an adult, so like I had more in common with my professors than I did with my like fellow students. Like I'm pretty sure I was older than some of my professors. So yeah, it's always spending time with like people who are different ages than you are is always enlightening. I find I learn so much from young people. I love being around young people. So we do have a question from the audience. So Trash Guy asks, what do you teach in college if you're willing to share?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. I teach at Emerson College, which is in Boston, and I teach in their writing, literature, and publishing department. I've taught courses on young adult fiction, and I've also taught courses in our MFA program for writers on marketing. And I'm hoping to, in the future, teach some creative writing workshops. We have workshops on things like YA fiction, horror, fantasy. So I'm hoping at some point to be able to teach one of those as well. The class that I got the comment was undergrad young adult fiction. And I remember feeling, oh, wow, I guess I am 30.
So a lot of us have kind of long and winding journeys. I mean, it's through with our genders. It's not always, you know, point A to point B. Sometimes we go point A to point Q to point Z, back to point B. So how would you say that your relationship to gender has evolved over time?
Yeah, you know, it has evolved quite a bit. I think it's been a very winding journey. As I mentioned, didn't hear the word transgender until I was 10, which I think actually was quite young, considering that I was born in 1993. For those of you who can figure that out based on math, I might as well just say.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I was aware of the community a lot younger than a lot of my peers, and I'm very fortunate for that. So I didn't use the word until I was 17. When I was 17 years old, that was when I was on message boards and communicating with other queer and trans people. And I first started saying, you know, I think I am transgender. And at the time I came out and I was like, I think I'm a trans man. And I wasn't super familiar with a lot of the other options. I wasn't super familiar with, you know, gender queer, non-binary, bigender, agender. I wasn't really familiar with those terms, and it felt like the best fit. I then kind of became more aware and I was like, you know, maybe I'm non-binary. So I kind of did a little bit of a dip back into the closet where I was like, oh, well, my friends and family know how I feel to an extent. And I'm just gonna not, you know, socially change too much. I'm not gonna change my pronouns. I'm not gonna, you know, do much with it, but I'm going to, you know, just enjoy my knowledge of my non-binariness and sort of live in that space for a while. And I made a very concentrated effort to make more trans friends in my mid 20s after I
Mm.
graduated from college because I had this wonderful, amazing queer community, which I thought was lovely. And I just was craving having more friends who were openly trans and identified that way and to talk about it with because there was, I think, a level of difference between me and my friends who were queer but cisgender. And I
Mm.
wanted to make more friends with intentionality. And at that point, I just kind of started getting really close with more trans people. And it was magical 2020 when everybody was facing COVID and the very beginning of the pandemic. You know, this was before vaccines, this was during social distancing. So we did not know what was really going on, and we were not hanging out with people at that time, you know, socially, or at least I wasn't, because I was taking precautions and I thought, I can't continue to live in this space anymore where I'm just allowing 75 to 90% of people assume that I'm a cis woman, and it was very painful. You know, I had changed my pronouns on Instagram, but if people asked me about it, I would not respond. I would change the subject. You know, I had they slash she slash he, and if my friends were like, hey, you know, what's up with the pronouns in your Instagram, I'd be like, oh, you know, I just like believe in pronouns. Like as if that's a concept that you cannot believe in.
Yes.
um
I mean, some people would try to argue that.
yeah.
uh,
And I wanted to come out to people and do something about it, so I started really thinking about that. And then my dad died suddenly from a heart attack, not from COVID, and I no longer felt as though I could come out. I felt stuck, in a previous version of myself. I felt like I had no idea how to find my way back to the person that I had been. And it took me another 3 years to come out. I spent the next 3 years slowly inching closer toward coming out and taking a big 2 steps and then another two back. I would cut my hair, but then, be like, oh, well, I can't wear pants. That's dangerous.
Oh.
So it wasn't until 2023 that I formally was like, all right, I think I have to be as honest and authentic as I can with everybody. And I just systematically came out to everyone in my life. And I was like, please use he and they pronouns for me. I chose a new name and started going by Fin, and asking people to call me that, and started exploring what that meant about my presentation and about my desires to socially and or medically transition. But it was absolutely quite a long process, because in 2020, I was very sure I spoke to a very close friend of mine about their own experience being on testosterone, because he had just started it at the time. And we had these long conversations, and I was like, all right, it's going to be me next. And then I was like, oh no, this is too scary.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, the pandemic certainly was an experience for a lot of trans folks that kind of were going through their transitions or just starting their transitions, or doing their social transitions, for whatever it is. It just, in my experience, it made certain things easier and a lot of things much harder. So but yeah, it's I find that like trans folks are already fairly socially isolated, like in the best of times, and then having this kind of come on top has been quite difficult. And now I'm distracted because there's a cat here.
Literary cat.
One of our literary cats is here.
Yay. I love the puffy tail on this cat.
Yes. Oh my god, so cute.
This is Blue.
So lovely. Well, Blue is named after an author, and I wanted us to perhaps switch topics and talk about trans representation in young adult fiction. So there's my segue. I'm wondering, Fin, as an intro to your young adult writing, what kind of genres and subgenres do you usually write in?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And just as a clarification, Blue is named after a character. She's named after Blue Sargent from The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater.
Oh,
nice.
And I like to write young adults. I also enjoy writing middle grade, and I enjoy writing adult speculative fiction, primarily fantasy and horror, but I am dipping my toes into sci-fi with a short story that I have coming out in an upcoming anthology. Owl Crate Press is a burgeoning publisher that just started this year, and their first set of books are these anthologies that are speculative fiction. And the first one is fantasy and horror, and it comes out later this year. And the second one is sci-fi, and it's set to come out next year. So I will be doing something a little bit different from what I typically do in writing sci-fi, and I'm excited to actually stretch that muscle in that way and give myself a creative challenge.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you said sci-fi, it's like, oh, now you're talking my language. I could info dump for a very long time about science fiction, but we'll start a second podcast for that one. But tell us a little bit about the history of trans representation in young adult novels. What are the origins, and what's the current state of that market?
Yeah, it's genuinely the history for the most part is that trans authors did not openly trans authors who identify as trans did not start being published really until the mid 2000s and the 2010s. Prior to that, we did have your occasional trans character in books that were written by cisgender authors. And historically, what we would see is that most of these stories would focus a lot on the gender identity of the character. So that's not to say that this is an inherently bad thing or an inherently good thing. I think that there's a place for all kinds of stories, but you would see a story that was primarily about a character who is coming out as trans or had recently come out as trans, and the entire narrative would really be focused on their coming out and also on the reactions from the community, which were often not great. So these were books where characters might be thrown out of their homes, they might be rejected by their family members, they might need to find new places to live or become unhoused by the end of the story. You know, you would see trans characters kind of going through a period of suffering. And these were sometimes told from the perspective of the actual transgender character, but a lot of times they were also being told from the perspective of someone close to them. So you'd see, you know, the whole story is about, you know, a trans girl, but we're seeing it through like her sister's perspective and how her sister has to react to her coming out, and the experience of watching your sibling go through something like that, and potentially, you know, their negative reactions from your community. And a lot of the novels that we saw, especially for young adults, were very heavily like that. You know, the first characters that were coming out, and if not that, then you might get a minor trans character in a book that was populated by other queer characters. So they might be a passing mention, sometimes unfortunately villainous. You know, it might be like a passing mention of a trans character who was in prison or incarcerated or something, you know, that is just mentioned in passing, and there's really no other context that we get about that character. We don't get to learn much about who they are or what they like to do, or they just be a kind of a background character, if not an outright villain or having some sort of you know, like nefarious intentions attached to them. And the canon has really picked up and changed, I think, from like the mid 2010s through now, as we're seeing more authors who are trans and are more deeply connected to the community too, I think, publishing stories. And we're seeing publishers want to pick up more than just a story that is so focused on gender identity. So now at this point, I think we are finally starting to see, you know, authors of color who are also trans, and then characters of color who are also trans. We're starting to see intersections of disability with trans characters. We are finally starting to see characters who are agender. The Heartbreak Bakery by A.R. Capetta, I think, is the first YA novel with an agender protagonist that I read. And Sid does not use any pronouns throughout the book, which I loved. I had not seen that before. And another character in that story also uses a combination of pronouns that change depending on the day. So we're finally seeing these stories where, you know, somebody might have multiple sets of pronouns that they use and they want them interchanged, or they want them to be different depending on the day, and they have a way of indicating that to friends or family. You know, we're finally starting to see speculative fiction, like Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, or their other book, The Sunbearer Trials. You know, we're seeing books where trans characters are trans, but like mostly they're summoning ghosts. Mostly, you know, they're performing magic. They're going on adventures. They're not just figuring out their identities the entire time. And I think we're also seeing a lot more trans YA romance as well. You know, we're seeing romance where trans characters actually get to have fun and flirt and get to know somebody and date and fall in love. And I think that has been a really beautiful blossoming thing as well, that we did not really see prior to that. It was all focused on the gender journey mostly.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And a lot of what you said kind of applies to a lot of different marginalized groups in fiction. So, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's a very long history of coding, antagonists or villains as queer. So if you watch Disney movies from the 90s or earlier, that's very, very apparent. But yeah, it's like there's so many stories out there. This, it's not just young adult fiction. It's pretty much across the board. It's, if you have a gay character, like being gay is their whole personality, or if you have a black character, like being black is their whole personality. So I think we're finally getting there with trans folks, where we're not just there to be the trans character. We're not just there to be an object of tragedy. Like, we get to have our own stories, because we finally see trans stories written by trans people, written for trans people. And that's, love to see it. I really, really do.
So the next question we have for you, Fin, is what is a problem novel, and do we need any more of these in regards to trans representation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it sort of goes back a little bit to what I was just talking about. A problem novel is really any story where the book and its narrative is focused around a problem that is very much tied to one particular aspect of someone's identity or journey. So it's kind of presenting a problem, and it's also doing so in a way that might be educational to some degree. So a problem novel could be something like, a queer character coming out or a trans character coming out. That could be coded as a problem novel if the whole storyline is like, young teenage boy comes out as gay, reactions to him coming out as gay, community learns a lesson, or he learns a lesson. A problem novel could also be something else as well. It can be something more like a problem novel might deal with, addiction or substance use. It could deal with, abortion. It could deal with any number of different things. But the way that it's presented is primarily as sort of like an educational vehicle. So if you have ever heard of, shows like Degrassi, which I was an avid fan of in the 2000s. Like Degrassi is like the problem novel of TV shows. It's just like every episode, a character is going through something and you're learning about that topic because the character is going through it. Like they'll show you a character going through, having to heal after a sexual assault or, dealing with self-harm. And that's a way for characters to go through something and for the viewer to learn about it. And we see that in books just as much, especially in books for young people. And I actually think they have a place in the canon and can be very useful. But what I think a lot of authors are trying to do now, and what I think more publishers are also trying to do with these novels, is have them not feel so focused on a problem that it feels like you are trying to educate your readers about something through the character as a vehicle, and instead giving characters a layered and nuanced storyline that could be relatable or could be something that you could empathize with, but they don't feel like their entire journey and their whole narrative is centered around this one thing. So you might have a coming out story, and I think there still very much is a place for coming out stories. I absolutely loved Man o' War by Cory McCarthy, which I read last year, and that is very much a coming out story. The protagonist is coming out throughout the entirety of the book. It's their journey of figuring out that they are queer and trans, but it doesn't feel like a problem novel. It feels like a character's story, and their identity is just a part of it. So I think that we still really do have a lot of place in the canon for stories that are about people figuring out who they are or dealing with things like substance use, or financial insecurity, or any divorce, death of a parent. Like death of a parent is a common problem novel topic too. I think we still need to see dead parents in fiction. I just think like, if it feels a little more like, hey, this is something that could happen to a close friend of yours and you're reading about it, then like, Oh, gasp. Imagine if that happened in my community, you know?
Yeah, it's the coming out stories are, I mean, I just see them as like, a special case of, coming of age stories. And
Mhm.
like there's no shortage of of age stories. I mean, there's quite a lot of those. So, I'm sure we can make room for, the queer coming of age stories. And
Exactly.
all those like problem novels, or in TV land I call them very special episodes, because like,
Yes.
I mean, Degrassi is like full of very special episodes, but like when you have like a show that is typically has one specific tone, but then they decide to do a very special episode, and it's like it feels totally jarring, but it's still like you need to address these problems. And maybe there's someone out there that they're watching their whatever show it is, and they're doing a very special episode, and it speaks to them and it helps them.
Yeah.
So for that reason, it's like it is important to do this sort of thing. So now, what are some of the ways that you've seen trans authors take care of their trans readers through writing?
Oh, so many ways. I love witnessing the ways that trans authors do this. I think content warnings is one way that I've seen trans authors take care of their readers. And this doesn't apply to just trans authors, but I've seen them do it quite a bit, listing out what the content warnings are going to be in the book, if
Mm-hmm.
possible, or if not, I've seen authors also post it on their social media, on their website, so that it's easy for readers to find. I think that can be so useful so that a reader going into it might know to expect. For example, perhaps there will be some dead naming in this story, and here's an explanation for why there's dead naming in this story, why I chose to do that, or just so that you can take care of yourself in reading, because there can be content that might be difficult for someone to read in a book, and it can be good to know that in advance for a lot of people, especially if it's something that you yourself personally would find to be difficult to read. Some people might not want to read about traumatic experiences that have happened to them. They might not want to read on the page transphobia, or on the page violence, on the page sexual assault. These are things that people should have the ability to consent to, or opt into, or out of. So I think it's wonderful to see having those, as is rising, and offering those content warnings is rising. I think it's very useful. And the first time I actually ever came across a content warning, I was in college, and my intro to LGBTQ history professor put on a documentary for us, and she stopped the documentary and said, I just want to let you all know that there is going to be, a suicide, and please leave the room if you cannot handle that. And I just remember feeling like, wow, that is amazing. We should be doing
Mm.
more of that. And I also think that a lot of trans authors are writing from a perspective of wanting their readers to feel loved and held as a reader, especially their trans readers and their queer readers. They want them to feel hopeful as they're reading. So they're careful about dead naming. If there's dead naming, it's intentional and it's part of the story, and they might address that, in an author's note or something.
Mm.
Otherwise, they might find ways to not have dead naming. I've seen a lot of trans authors show the impact that dead naming and misgendering has without actually showing it on the page. So you might have a character say the dead name, but we never hear it as readers. We don't see it, we don't know it. We feel the character's reaction to what it is
Yeah.
like to have that experience. And
Mm.
I think that that's a beautiful way to do it, because if you don't actually need to show it and you don't want to show it, we can still see why that would be painful. We can still empathize with the character. And I think a lot of trans authors, especially authors, for young adults and children, are thinking about how they want readers to feel after reading a story. So, for example, I've read a few books by Andrew Joseph White, and his books are horror. These are often dystopian. They are taking place in situations where the characters are being dead named, and where it is dangerous for them to be trans. And yet every book I've read by him, I feel so hopeful afterward, They're populated by queer and trans characters that are surviving and thriving despite their circumstances. And you just feel in the pages that this is somebody who cares about the trans community. You feel that this is about fighting back, and this is about advocacy and hope and love and euphoria. And you don't feel as though there's just darkness in the future when you're reading it. So I think a lot of authors are very careful to imbue that kind of hope in the story. They're going to show the realities of what it might be like to experience transphobia in the world, but they are also going to show the euphoria that happens, the joy that happens, the community that happens, and with a lot of intentionality.
We have some comments from the chat that I want to weave in with this conversation. Juice Text is letting us know that StoryGraph is another good source of content warnings from fellow readers or from the author. So that is another content warning resource for folks. And then Cyber Punk Boy is sharing, I have a friend who makes games about very difficult subjects, and when she does things like this, she uses a high impact font with example bracket dead name, the word in all caps and bracket, or slur, which is also in brackets with all caps instead of the actual word. So it's sort of like bleeping visually with the words without actually sharing the content, which is an interesting strategy. I haven't seen that implemented before, Bear, so I appreciate you bringing that in as another
I have actually seen
another
that
way to take care of trans.
I've seen that in the game Disco Elysium, where there's a lot of like dark subject matter in that game, but whenever like something like a slur comes up, it gets bleeped out. So both like because like there's voice acting, the voice acting gets bleeped out, and the transcription also gets like bleeped out. So like you know what the character is likely saying, but you don't have to hear it, you don't have to see it. So it's
yeah. A Bear is adding, Quinn K is a trans game dev. I recommend her games. There swings a skull and an outcry, even if the subject matter is very intense. I was a beta tester for an outcry.
Yeah.
And I'll put those two game titles in the show notes for folks to reference as well. Awesome. Miranda, would you be willing to ask our next question for us?
Yes, absolutely. So what are some of your personal favorite examples of trans young adult novels, and why?
I could honestly go on and on about this probably forever.
Well, let's pick two.
Oh, two. Oh, wow. That's swinging correct right in the other direction. So
okay.
I guess
all right,
I'll
we'll pick five then. I don't know.
I absolutely loved I mentioned Man of War. I absolutely loved that. I think that it's incredibly well written, and that story really deftly deals with gender identity and coming of age and what it's like to be a trans swimmer. You know, it deals with so many beautiful things, and the characters are just so alight with life, and they really come off the page. And I also absolutely loved Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender, which is another beautiful story. I am a big fan of Anna Marie McLemore's work, in particular Self-Made Boys, which is a great Gatsby retelling in which both Gatsby and Nick are trans, and Nick is also Mexican American. So that is actually the first time that I ever saw a YA book that had a T for T romance, you know, trans for trans, where a trans person is dating another trans person. That's the first time I'd ever seen that in a YA novel. Of course, I've seen it in other places, but so impactful to see that for teenagers. I also really liked I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver, which was recently turned into a Sundance film. I haven't seen it because I didn't go to Sundance. I'm hoping that it comes to streaming so that I can watch it. I think that one was a lot of fun. I think that I also have been a fan of The Borrow a Boyfriend Club by Paige Powers, which is a really cute YA romance with a trans character. And Edward Underhill's Always the Almost is a really adorable trans YA romance as well, that I really enjoyed. And I also, I think I already mentioned the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas, which is a fantasy YA, but I just love how we're getting so many more YA trans characters in fantasy and horror and sci-fi so that we can see, see ourselves in speculative fiction, because it's really fun to see trans characters in these worlds where
absolutely
gender is dealt with differently, and what I like about Thomas's work is that in every story they find some way to weave in magic related to gender identity. I don't want to spoil it, but like there will be rules around the magic that have to do with gender identity, and they end up in very euphoric ways for the trans characters.
Aww. Oh, I love that.
Awesome. So I have a few more questions for you today. It looks like this next one is about legislation. So I'll just do an inline content warning. If anyone's feeling particularly tender about the state of the legislative world, maybe step away for 10 minutes and come back in a little bit. So Finn, what do you think about anti-trans book bans that are coinciding with general anti-trans legislation? I mean, in this particular moment, I'm talking about the United States, since you and I are both here in the US, but I imagine there may be some of that happening globally as well. I'm just less aware of it. Miranda's doing a big nod yes for Canada.
Yes. I mean, I literally, like on Friday, I just went to a rally to protest for LGBTQ rights. So yes, the anti-transcript has made its way here as well. So
the worst export ever.
It seems to be in multiple different areas, but
yeah,
I think that what it shows me is that things don't happen in a vacuum. So when we see this rise in anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans legislation specifically, it has a direct correlation with censorship and book banning, because these things do not exist in a vacuum. They are feeding off of each other. If we are feeling as though it is dangerous for young people to have access to these ideas because these ideas might give them opportunities or freedom or expose them to things that are going to broaden their worldview or, make them change their mind, vote differently, react differently as citizens, under capitalism in the kinds of systems of oppression that we live in. I think that all of these things are very interconnected with one another. I think that transphobia comes from colonialism and white supremacy and racism and capitalism. I don't think that these things are disconnected from one another. So I think that, when we're seeing all of this rise of anti-trans legislation, this is a reaction out of fear that's trying to control people. It's trying to control a population, and it's not really devoid of the larger context of trying to control people in other ways. And censorship and book banning are great ways to control people. If people don't have access to stories and access to learning about topics through fiction or nonfiction, then they cannot join those communities or advocate or get together and do some collective activism. It's preventing people from having the access that they would need to create communities where they are stronger together and can fight back against systems of oppression. If people are exhausted and isolated and scared and they don't have access to these things, then they are not going to do things like rally. They are not going to do things like protest. They are not going to do things like get together and fight for their rights, because they're just exhausted at the end of the day. And they also don't have access to those pieces of euphoria that kind of keep you buoyed and keep you going through a hard time. And, for some people, those those pieces of euphoria might be like in-person community. They might be going to queer and trans spaces, hanging out with your other friends, talking about gender identity. But for some people, they don't have that. If somebody is living in an area where they do not have access to in-person community, or they're disabled and therefore can't access in-person community, they're a minor and living with parents who won't let them access in-person queer and trans community, you're not going to have that hope that things can get better. And hope is a very dangerous thing for dismantling systems. Hope is the most dangerous thing that we can possibly have. Joy and hope is very dangerous. So they don't want, I say they super broadly, but people who are trying to legislate against LGBTQ folks' right to exist don't want young people to believe that their future can be joyful or full of community or better, because that will give them the hope that allows them to fight back against things like anti-drag bans or bathroom bans or bans on gender affirming care, bans on using people's preferred pronouns in schools. I mean, the bans really target so many things. People continually suggest as though these are just bans against gender affirming care for minors, which are very serious bans as well, but they're also bans against just like socially existing in a lot of ways. And it's an attempt to control people. So if they're not seeing anybody in their school using these pronouns because their school's not letting anybody use these pronouns, and then they're also not seeing books with these pronouns because their school's not letting them see these books, they're going to feel alone. They're going to feel isolated. They're going to feel scared. They're going to feel like, okay, I'm the problem. I'm the only one who feels this way, and I cannot get out there and be happy and find community, which is very untrue. But that's why the bans work really well in conjunction with other forms of legislation, because it keeps people afraid and unaware.
Yeah, that lack of access, that lack of information it's huge. I mean, a lot of folks take a long time to find themselves because they literally don't have the language to describe how they're feeling. And yeah, it's really sad. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a whole political podcast, but I'm like, things are happening in my country right now that have me scared, that because the needle is very much swinging to the right. So it's dark days right now, but if we're going to get, the way to get through this is through community, it's through supporting each other, it's through our activism. So speaking of supporting, what are some of the things that people can do to support trans authors as well as trans readers?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that people can really do is talk about trans books and talk about these stories and talk about these issues with other people in their lives. If you can afford to monetarily support trans authors, that's wonderful. By purchasing new or used copies of their books, it very much does help authors to be clear that you buy a book, especially if you pre-order it or buy it right when it's coming out. But that being said, for a lot of people, they can't, do that, or you can't buy every trans author's book. It would be great if you could, but requesting those books at your local library, fighting for those books in your community and showing up if there are book bans that are targeting your community, showing up to school board meetings or writing to your representatives in the community in support of the book, talking about these books with the people in your lives. If somebody's asking you, hey, what are you reading? You can tell them about books that you're reading, and be sure to include books by trans authors that you've been reading, recommending them, widely, not just recommending them when people are looking specifically for that, but in general, recommending them kind of widely among people that you're talking to, your friends and family and community members. I think those are great ways to just be loud about it, and continue to use your voice and make sure that people know that you are very much in support of books by trans authors and that you support the trans community. I think, especially for folks who are outside of the community, who are allies to the community and want to be doing more to support in that way, that's a great way to do it. It definitely means the world to me when I have an ally in my life who is like, oh, I'm reading this book, Page Boy, by Elliot Page or something. And they're like, and I am reading it to understand more about your experience, or I'm reading it to understand more about the community, or, I'm reading it and I'm wondering if I can ask you how this relates to you, or things that I can do to support you. I think those are great ways to support, maybe like a trans person in your life, who could use that support. And if you happen to be friends with a trans writer, like reading their work and uplifting their work is definitely helpful, especially if you see that they are being impacted by censorship or being impacted by the ripple effects of censorship, like canceled school visits or fewer school visits, publishers being less interested in their work. Just making sure that you're like continuing to show up and support them. Maybe you're asking them about what they're writing, maybe you're buying their book, maybe you're showing up to their events. I think those are great ways. Whenever I can, I try to go to trans authors events in the Boston area. If they go to one of the indie bookstores, I'm like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to buy the book and I'm going to ask the author questions.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, oh boy, it's so important to support the art that enriches your life. And I harp on this a lot. And like, I'm not saying this to like, oh, look how great I am, but like, I personally financially support trans art that enriches my life. So like, if everyone would do that, perhaps there would be more of it.
Miranda, you even support this show, even though
I
you're on the
do.
show.
Yes. No, I mean, I volunteer my time and my money for this show. So, and I have a number of friends that, make art that very much enriches my life, and I financially support them as well. So, this is not, again, this is not to say, oh, look at all this money I can throw around. Look how great I am. It's like, no, that's not the point of this. The point of this is like, I'm trying to encourage other people to do the same. Because it's really easy to sit there and, watch a YouTube video and like, just close it and just not think about the person making that video. Or, in this case, read a book and then just like not think about the person who has written that book, or not think about the other people that, might be impacted by that story, or, whatever art medium that speaks to you, whether it be, whether it be novels, whether it be film, whether it be music, whatever it is. Chances are, if a trans person is making that art, they really need your support. So do what you can, is that's my plea. That's my plea to everyone.
Finn, in your own view, was the hashtag Own Voices movement harmful to trans writers, especially those who were not yet out?
I just want to kind of do a little explanation of what that movement was, before I answer this. It was a hashtag that kind of rose in popularity, and originally the Own Voices movement was actually intended by an author, uh, speaking about authors who were open and out about their identities. So it was intended for a way for readers to read books by authors who shared the experience of their characters and who were already out and willing to be public about sharing that experience. So it might be Black authors who are writing Black characters, it might be autistic authors who are writing autistic characters. It wasn't intended originally to out anyone. Unfortunately, that's not how people always take things as how they were intended. And over time, a lot of people used this as a way to try to demand information about writers. And even it kind of has extended to other areas as well. It's extended to actors who are portraying characters in movies. It's extended out to musicians, to say, we want you to come out. We want you to tell us about your orientation or your gender identity. And I think that that is what is harmful, is demanding information about people because of a story that they are telling, or at all, for any reason, really. There's no reason that you should demand information about somebody that they don't want to give to you. If somebody is happily, openly, proudly queer and trans, then you can absolutely talk about that when you talk about their book or their song. You know, it's great to be like, oh, you know, Renee Rapp is a proud lesbian singer. Like, it's great to say that. And that's exciting and that's wonderful. And we have plenty of people who are out there talking about their identities and how their identities relate to their work. And we can uplift them without forcing people to come out of the closet about any kind of identity. It can be very harmful, whether it's a trans identity or whether you're demanding somebody perform disability in a way that you're more familiar with, or you're questioning somebody's race or ethnicity because of the way that they look or because of their name. It's harmful to demand this information from somebody unless they are giving it to you and saying it to you. So I think it has been really harmful in that way, because it has blossomed into something that has caused writers to really feel like they need to come out about their identities in order to write stories, rather than letting the art speak for itself and then allowing them to be out to whatever extent they feel comfortable about their own lives. And I don't think that that's the way that it was intended. So I think there's still very much a place for, like, oh, supporting trans books by trans authors, you know, is a wonderful thing, and I love doing it. And I also have read some great books by authors before they came out, and I've been like, oh, I see you. And then they've come out and I've been like, yep, you know, still waiting. You know, I loved your book before, I loved your stories before, and I totally saw that, and I don't need you to put that on your dust jacket for me to enjoy the story. And I'm glad you got here too.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I feel like there's a lot of just well-meaning people that are just taking things too far. And just stop for a second and just have some empathy and think like, especially for like fellow queer folks doing this. So like, think about how you would have felt if someone forced you to come out before you were ready. So just stop and think for a second, like, okay, what's the motivation behind this? And like, who is this really helping? Who's this really hurting? So but yeah, it's funny that you mentioned when you like, you know, enjoy a piece of art that's made by a queer person who's not out as queer yet, but then you look at these arts like, pretty sure this person's queer. Then they come out later and it's like, I see you. I see you. Yeah, I've a couple of times that's happened where it's just like, I'm pretty sure this person is X. And then, you know, a little while longer they come out. So it's but yeah, it's you come out on your own timeline, and like even if you're like, it's not even like helpful to speculate about people. Like, don't even do that. Like, it's if you think that like someone might be, you know, queer or trans or whatever, just keep that to yourself. Just let that person reveal the parts of themselves that they're comfortable revealing when they're comfortable revealing it. So yeah, that's my little soapbox. Now, what do you see as the role of all trans anthologies, such as Transmogrify? I love the name.
Yeah, I think anthologies like this, where they are purposefully compiling stories that are all by trans authors, and a lot of anthologies do this. Sometimes anthologies will do it with writers of a certain orientation or race or ethnicity or religion. And I think that the role of them is to show that communities are not a monolith and that there's not one single story. And I think that they are great ways to really diversify the canon in a big way, because each story is going to be written by an individual author. That person's going to have their own experience, they're going to have their own lens through which they tell that story. And that's going to be probably a multifaceted lens that's impacted by everything in their life and their whole life experience. So I think that those types of anthologies are just a wonderful way to also show the importance of trans stories and why these stories are so valuable. And I think, in particular, since we have been talking a bit about young adult fiction, something like that aimed at young people really tells you, hey, there's a community here and there are people, it's not just you and like one or two celebrities. I think we're getting to the point where there are more folks who are open and proudly trans, but to feel as though it's not just you and a handful of other people that are always going to be tokenized or othered, that there's a whole vibrant community, and you might not be able to relate to every single story in an anthology, but you might be able to relate to a few. You might be able to see different pieces of yourself and then see, hey, there's a bunch of different ways to be trans. And what if
Absolutely.
these authors have written books? What if every author who's in this anthology has also written a book that could speak to me, or wants to write a book that could speak to me, so that you don't feel like, am I the only person in the world that feels this way?
Yeah, and it's I mean, I remember a time when there were very few publicly trans folks. And I'm very glad we now get to live in a day where a certain former Olympian isn't the sole representative of all trans people. So if you know, you know.
So we have a couple of concluding questions for you, Finn, so that we can begin our descent of our story, our what's it called? Our denouement, if you will.
Yes.
Is there anything that we missed about trans representation in young adult fiction that you'd like to make sure you get a chance to say on the show today?
I think the main thing that I would just want to kind of reiterate is that I love seeing stories at the intersections of different experiences. And it's been so beautiful to witness how that has blossomed. So seeing trans representation in stories about characters of color and disabled stories, characters who are religious minorities and trans, characters who are queer in some other way and trans, like they might not just be the T in LGBTQ, they might be something else as well. That's been really beautiful to see. And I also just love it when stories have more than one trans character and there's like trans friendships or trans romances, or trans community people who are interacting with each other. That's something that I don't I don't get a chance to do in every single thing that I write, but even in short stories, I always try for there not to be like just one trans character, because then it feels like they're living in a vacuum. And I'm like, I don't know about you, but I don't know that many trans people that don't have a bunch of other trans friends. So I try to at least make sure they have other trans people in their life and in the story.
So this next question is actually my favorite question, just because, throughout this conversation, we've brought up many examples of the trans experience being framed in a negative light. It's often the conversation revolves around the hardships and the traumas that we face. But I think it's far more important that we share our joy. Can you share experience that you've had with gender euphoria?
Oh man, there's so many good ones to share, but I will just share one because you asked for one. And when I decided that I was going to officially get top surgery, one of the things that a friend of mine told me that I really held on to is that giving people hugs would be so impactful and wonderful after I had top surgery, that it would feel like I was so much closer to people and closer to myself,
Oh, that's interesting.
and in my body. And I really waited and felt a lot of excited anticipation for that moment. And I finally have had that moment, now that I'm on the other side of surgery recovery. So you can imagine my gender euphoria as me in a goth nightclub hugging my friend and surrounded by a bunch of other goths dancing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never even thought of that because, like, I mean, I've always been a little bit on the heavier side, so there's always kind of like a layer in between between me and the other person when we're hugging. So it's like, oh, yeah, I guess that does kind of make sense. Now, is there anything that you want to make sure that folks know about your perspective on gender and non-binary, trans, and or gender diverse issues?
I guess I would just want to say that my perspective is only one person, which I
Mhm.
think I've kind of said by emphasizing the importance of stories. And, I am white. I grew up in liberal Massachusetts. My family has always been incredibly accepting of the trans community, and I'm very lucky about that. My access to healthcare because I live in Massachusetts has always been I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate for that. It's not
Mm,
the same for a lot of folks. And I think it's something that is very deeply important to me to fight for because I'm aware of the ways in which it has not always been historically easy for me as a disabled and formerly low income person, but
mm,
also the ways in which it has been easy for me and may not be easy for other folks who don't have access to healthcare or don't have supportive families or living in states where, access to this kind of social or medical transition has been banned or heavily limited. It's important to me to fight for all of us. We will not be free unless all of us are free, and I
exactly.
genuinely truly believe that.
Yes, I'm 100% with you there. That's honestly that's one of my favorite chants at rallies is no one we're not free until we're all free. Yeah. So I wholeheartedly agree with you there.
All right. I think that's all the questions we have, right, Miranda?
Yeah,
We did it. We got
we
all through all the
did.
questions. So, folks, Fin Leary is a program manager at We Need Diverse Books, where he's worked since 2015. Finn is also an affiliated faculty at Emerson College and a reviewer for Booklist. His work has been published in outlets including the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, Teen Vogue, and the Boston Globe magazine. Finn lives with his wife and their literary cats in Rainbow Bookshelf outside of Boston. You can find out more information at finleary.com. That's FINLEARY.com. Finn is also on Instagram and Twitter as Fin Leary. And now here is this week's Clatter Query that you, our audience, can answer on social media platforms.
What's your favorite example of a character who represented you in a way you'd never seen before?
Thank you for your very wonderful query. To be honest, folks, we haven't figured out next week's guest, so I don't have a next week's guest to announce for you.
No, you're supposed to
I
tell
do know
everyone
that
it's a secret.
it's a secret.
Yeah, it's a
It's a
secret.
secret surprise, even for
This is
me.
all part of the stage managing. It's all part of the magic. Is keep the audience guessing and never let them know that you don't know what you're doing.
However, also, if you are interested in helping the team produce the show, we could maybe use a couple more people helping out with some of the weekly tasks. So if you are listening to this and you know who the heck I am, send me a Discord message on at GenderMeowster. If you've never interacted with us before, maybe send me an email instead, gendermeowster@gmail.com, and let me know what sort of things you have experience with, what you might be interested in, and we'll see if it's a good match. So in terms of community updates, we do have our mutual aid event coming up in July that I can remind everyone about. So Meowster Mutual Aid, which is a fundraiser for me and my bottom surgery, is coming up July 11th through 14th. So mark your calendars for that. We will have the streamer applications dropping in the next month or two. We'll get there when we get there. And yes, the other community announcement is we will be at Trans Pride Seattle, which is at the end of June. So on June 28th, we will be tabling there for the podcast. If you'd like to come and meet me, maybe even other people who are here right now, maybe.
Maybe.
I do know that friend of the show, DJ Nerd, will be flying in from the UK to visit. So for Pride on purpose, like specifically for Pride. So if you all would like to come hang out for Pride in Seattle that weekend, please do swing by the GenderMeowster booth, and we might plan some kind of barbecue picnic thing in some park at some point that weekend. I don't know. Executive function has not been high. So,
yes.
Anyways, if you're interested in any of that, do let me know. It should be a fun time. Anyways, so Genderful would also like to thank all of our supporters on Patreon: Miranda Catita, Holly Blash, Winter Vespers, Loch Ness Gamer, Justin Baker Rojas, Yaicio, Ray of Swords, Mirami, The Hessian, and Trans Capybara. Please enjoy the outro. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Genderful would like to thank our guest for being on this podcast. If you'd like to catch us live, join us on Mondays on twitch.tv/GenderMeowster. Show notes will appear in the edited versions of the show on Fridays on both YouTube and podcasting platforms.
If you have a question you'd like the host to answer, or are gender diverse and would like to request an interview, please send an email to genderfulpodcast@gmail.com or sign up via the website at genderfulpodcast.com.
As a gender diverse community, the Clouder wants to assure our listeners that we're prepared to moderate our spaces. We will get positive and negative feedback on these shows and topics, and we have a moderation team on our channels, socials, and Discord server ready to deal with this.
Please join our Discord server at discord.gg/meowster to meet the community and get a regular digest of solidarity resources. You can also support us with subscriptions on Patreon, following and reviewing us on your favorite podcasting platform, or engaging with our posts and content on social media at GenderfulPod and at GenderMeowster.
You can take a few minutes to rate the show. We will post any 5-star reviews on our socials, so get creative. Mention a special interest of your own, a project you're working on, or even say hi to your comfort person in your review. What power!
This show is made possible by volunteers, tips, and subscriptions. Shout out to the folks helping us coordinate guests, edit the podcast, moderate the live chat, and post on our socials.
Here's our artist credit. Genderful is hosted by Miranda Catita and GenderMeowster. Genderful's pre-show is wrangled by JuiceTex. Genderful's live stream is produced by Mirami. Genderful is edited and mixed by Transgriffin and Free Range Megs. Genderful's promos and thumbnail graphic are designed by Transgriffin. Genderful's social media is managed by Kainsey. Genderful's theme song is called Hope by Free Range Megs, also known as Soma. The current GenderMeowster logo was designed by Siptopia. Genderful is the intellectual property of GenderMeowster. All rights reserved. Trans rights are human rights. That's right.